Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Image Center Housing 101 presentation. We are the Image Center, Independent Marylanders Achieving Growth Through Empowerment. We are a center serving people with disabilities in Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Harford County. We have a variety of services for people with disabilities at our center, and we welcome you to reach out and ask us about all of our different services and program offerings. But today in this video, we're going to focus specifically on affordable housing for people with disabilities. You will find during this presentation that housing is pretty limited in terms of resources, but we do offer some services at the Image Center, and we can also give you information about how to do other kinds of research. So in this presentation, we're going to be giving you an overview of some community resources of which we are aware that can assist people in finding affordable housing. And we are also going to be going through some services that we provide directly. So as I noted previously, the current housing situation is somewhat challenging because affordable housing is very difficult to come by. There are few resources out there, and pretty much every single affordable apartment is going to come with waiting lists. We have never seen an affordable apartment that is readily available. And so one thing that I'll tell you now, and that you're going to hear throughout this presentation, is to apply for as many waiting lists as possible, because that's going to maximize your chances of getting an affordable housing unit in the future. Getting on as many as you can, getting as many drops in the bucket as possible is really going to be your best bet. There are some immediate housing resources. We'll get a little bit into those later, but none of them are actual affordable apartment units. So we're going to talk a little bit about before you apply for housing and what you need to consider before applying for housing. So you want to consider your current living situation and think about what it is you are looking for. So you want to ask yourself questions like, why am I looking for housing? Can I preserve my current living situation if I wanted to, or if it is feasible? What are my options that I'm willing to pursue? Where do I want to live? What is my timeline? And just thinking about, all of those different things that are going to impact your housing search. Considering your desired location is also really important. And we say that particularly for people with disabilities, because there are certain areas of the community that have better accessibility than other areas. So we like to underscore that. If you are a person who does not drive and you rely on either public transportation or something like mobility, or, family and friends or a hired driver to give you rides, that might be harder if you're wanting to live in a really rural part of Maryland. I know as a person with a disability myself, I don't drive, and so it's very difficult for me to live in rural areas. So if I'm going to be looking for housing, I'm going to either be wanting to live in the suburbs or in somewhere more urban, because that way I'll have more access to public transportation. So when you're thinking about and considering your desired location, we encourage you to be realistic about what you can afford, about where you can live in. We speak with people a lot who are in very desperate housing situations, and they say, oh, I'll live anywhere. And then something comes up on the waiting list for them and they say, oh, well, that's not going to be feasible because of my disability. So, just really considering, where specifically can you live, and being aware of that from the outset so that you know that you're applying to the proper waiting lists in the proper areas. So be realistic, as I said. Consider the following things. You want to consider accessibility, as we discussed. You want to consider the rental amount, how much you can realistically afford with your budget. You want to think about transportation, shopping, doctors and community services, thinking about being near family and friends. As we learned, it's really important to be near a support system, whatever that support system looks like for you. Looking into where is your place of employment, or where do you want to be employed? Is that going to be near where you're living? So all of those things really amount into deciding where it is that you are going to want to live and how you want to evaluate how you want to move forward with your research. As we talked about briefly, you're going to want to consider your budget. Affordable housing, typically, the way we think about affordable housing is 1/3 of a person's monthly income. So let's hypothetically say that you get $900 a month in Social Security disability. That means that affordable housing for this example would equal $300. That includes the rent and the utilities. So $300 is what would be considered affordable. Now, there are some statistics that show that most people, unfortunately, in the inflation in the economy that we're dealing with right now, most people are spending more than 1/3. Whether they're on SSDI, SSI, or they're actually working full time. So the rent is definitely very high. And that's part of the reason why affordable housing is so hard to find. So many people need it and so many people want it. So we end up with a situation where affordability is not always very feasible. But we, of course, at our center, we really focus on affordable housing and different ways to make that happen for folks so that they can make sure that that remaining $600 or whatever that amount might be can go as far as possible. A number of different housing options that you can consider. Renting is probably the most common. You could also think about possibility of owning your own home. Home sharing, which is basically a fancy word for renting a room from a homeowner. And then another option is preservation, which means preserving your current living situation, which can sometimes be done, but it sometimes can't. And there are pros and cons to each one of these living situations. So we're going to go through each of them one by one, and we're going to start off with renting. So the advantages of renting: you have your own place. Maintenance is available, so you're not responsible for the costs or anything like that, unless anything is intentionally damaged, in which case you are usually responsible for the cost at most properties. You don't have a long-term commitment like a mortgage. Usually most of the leases that I see are 12 months long, which that's a year, so that can seem kind of long, but mortgages are a much longer term commitment. So, comparatively, a year-long lease is not that long. And sometimes I've even seen 6-month leases. So it just depends on the property and what they're willing to do. There are some disadvantages to renting as well. One of them, of course, as we've discussed, is waiting lists. There's nothing immediately available for affordable housing. And there's also, of course, the consideration that once you do move in, it's not your own property. You have to abide by the lease terms and the lease rules. There's a lot of different renting vocabulary that is really important when talking about housing for people with disabilities. So I'm just going to run through a couple of different words real quick, but don't worry, we're going to go through them one by one. So project-based rental assistance is one thing that we're going to go over. Tenant-based rental assistance, they're kind of opposites of one another, and we'll get into that. Income-based rent, and non-elderly disabled housing. So those are kind of our 4 rental terms that we're going to be defining. Project-based voucher. So a project-based voucher is a voucher that stays with the unit. So in other words, let's say a property manager has a property and there are, let's say, 40 units in the property, and 5 of those units are designated as affordable housing units. And let's say you get one of those units. And let's say in a year or 2, you want to move, you want to go somewhere else, different part of town. You cannot transfer that voucher to another place because that voucher was agreed upon by the property for that specific unit. So if you wanted to move, you would need to find either another project-based place to go or get some other kind of rental assistance. But basically, this type of affordable housing means that the voucher stays with the unit, and that if you want to go somewhere else, you have to seek other sorts of rental assistance because you obviously can't take the unit with you. So that's rental assistance that's attached to the unit. Another way to think about it is a non-portable voucher. An example of this is public housing. You may have heard of public housing. In this service area, it's most common down in Baltimore City. That is a form of project-based housing. Also, individual affordable properties have this, even outside of public housing, and we'll get a little bit more into that later on. Looking more into public housing, as I said, it's a type of project-based housing, so it's a collection of buildings that are specifically for affordable housing. If you want to move, you might be able to move to a different designated unit, but otherwise, you're going to need to seek rental assistance elsewhere because it's attached to that building. And the person who applied to move in, is only attached to that and entitled to that rental assistance so long as they live there. As I said, public housing is common in Baltimore City. We don't see public housing in Baltimore County or in Harford County, but there is a number of that in Baltimore City. The unfortunate reality, however, is that the public housing waiting list is closed for Baltimore City. It sometimes does open periodically. They'll sometimes open it for a week or two, take in some new applicants and close that again. So if that's something you're interested in, it may be worth keeping an eye on the website to see when and if that changes. It is a waiting list, so again, nothing immediate there. And then there is also a website provided here for your convenience. And then you could also call Baltimore Housing as well. And if you need any contact information throughout this presentation, we will be providing some, but if you need further contact info, you're always welcome to reach out to us. And we will be sharing our contact info later on so that you can reach us. We're going to talk about the direct opposite of project-based vouchers, which are tenant-based vouchers. And that is a type of voucher that is attached to the individual. So let's say, you get awarded a voucher, you move into a place and you want to move somewhere else. Well, no problem. The county awarded the voucher to you, not to a property. So you get to go somewhere else and apply for a different unit that also accepts your voucher. So it's rental assistance that travels with you, with the individual, wherever you go. Housing Choice Voucher is an example of a tenant-based voucher. Housing Choice Voucher used to be called Section 8, so they're quite literally one and the same. So don't let the language trip you up. As I said, it's a portable voucher attached to the person and not to the unit. You can transfer this to different states and counties. Some counties will have a rule and say, for the first 2 years, you need to stay in this county, but after that, you can go wherever you like. It just depends on the county. So those rules are all going to be different from county to county. Going a little more into Housing Choice Voucher / Section 8, as I said, used to be known as Section 8. You need to apply for this through the local county housing authority. So this is not something that the Image Center does. It's every single county has their own public housing authority because they all have control over their own Section 8 waiting list. The trouble in Maryland is that most Section 8 waiting lists are closed. The only one that is open in this service area is Harford County. So if you have any interest in Harford County, it is an online application. I highly recommend that you get on that waiting list because we never know when they're going to close it. So you want to make sure that you get on that as soon as possible. Baltimore County and Baltimore City, their Section 8 waiting lists are both closed at this time, unfortunately. So if you're already on there, you got ahead of the game before they close them. Otherwise, we hope that they will do, we certainly can't say that they won't open them up for a brief 2-week period or so to take more applications, but you never know. So it's always worth checking back about these things, and that you can do through the website of the local county housing authorities. Some waiting lists for this have residency and employment preferences, so you'll have to go through and see how that works for each individual county. I want to talk a little bit more about Baltimore County Housing. It has a new online application system. Now, as you heard me just say, of course, the Section 8 waiting list is closed, but they do have the ability for you to apply for some other programs, for some other project-based units. So that's something that you're welcome to do. The website is provided here, and you can always go take a look at that, see if you meet any of the criteria for any of their other project-based programs. We're going to tackle our third rental vocabulary word, and that is income-based rent. So that's monthly income, which is based on your income, and it's based on a sliding scale. So essentially, let's take our example from earlier. Let's say you're getting $900 per month in SSDI, and income-based rent for you means that they would adjust your rent based on your income. So that we'll take that 1/3 number. That means that you would pay about $300 in rent if you got $900 a month in SSDI. Now, the sliding scale means that, let's say, next year they we'll just make the math easy, they'll up your payments to $1,200. So if you're getting $1,200 and they need to figure out 1/3 of your sliding scale, that's going to be $400 a month in rent. So the sliding scale just means it's based on whatever your income is, and they use that 1/3. Now, these are simplified examples. Sometimes they include, it depends on the property, but sometimes they'll include medical deductions and child support deductions, different things like that. But again, this is a very simplified example just to give you the idea. But sometimes you will have to submit extra paperwork to prove that you get a certain benefit or are paying for something that they can then exclude from that calculation. But again, that depends on the property, and that's very individualized. We're going to talk about our fourth and final rental vocabulary term. It's a mouthful: non-elderly disabled housing. For short, we call it NED housing. It's housing set aside for people with disabilities in senior housing properties. So when we talk about a senior housing property, they're usually 62 years of age and up, or, sometimes I see them as low as 55 years and up. And what we're looking at in that case is some units in there that are set aside for people who have disabilities who are below that age. So if you're 42 and you want to look into housing for people with disabilities and you don't mind living in a senior community, reaching out to some senior communities to find non-elderly disabled housing units may be helpful to you. I will caution you that these are becoming less and less common. Even over the last 4 years, I've definitely seen a decrease in terms of senior properties that will offer this. But it certainly cannot hurt to do your research, make a couple calls, see what you can find. Some senior communities have this, many do not. So just to make you aware of that possibility. And I want to close out our rental section with a couple brief notes. As I've mentioned, be prepared to wait. None of this is a quick option, unfortunately. Our center is actively engaged in advocacy to try to advocate for more affordable units, but that is taking some time. And in the meantime, we want folks to be aware that finding affordable housing takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of time, because we want people to apply to as many wait lists as possible, and that can be time consuming. Affordable properties come with waiting lists. We really strongly encourage you to look at as many housing opportunities as possible. Even if you get on a couple lists, we encourage you to get on some more and apply to as many as you can. That's truly the best advice that I can give about looking for affordable housing. So we're going to talk a little bit about a specific rental program later on in the presentation, but for right now, and we are going to discuss home sharing. Now, as I said, home sharing is basically a fancy way of saying renting a room from a homeowner or renting a basement apartment from a homeowner or something like that. These can have a variety of advantages, but basically a homeowner rents out a room or a space and you pay rent and utilities depending on your agreement. And I'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages. So some of the home sharing pros and cons. Advantages: it's one of the fastest ways to find affordable housing. If you want to find an affordable place to live as quickly as possible, you're either looking at getting a shelter referral or looking into renting a room from a homeowner. Everything else is going to be wait lists. So if you feel like you might know somebody who has a room to rent, or you want to look into some programs for renting a room, I highly recommend that. And that's a good place to wait while you're waiting on some wait lists. Other advantages: the rent is low, the utility bills are low. Advantage could potentially be companionship from the roommate. Some people find it very comforting to live in a community with other people. It's a short-term lease contract. A lot of times roommates can be month to month. So if you don't really know what's going to happen in the next couple months, that might be a really good option. Sometimes they're longer, so be aware of what contract you're entering into before you sign anything. Some disadvantages as well. Just as companionship from the roommate can be a pro, having conflicts with the roommate can be a con. So, you want to make sure that you're living somewhere where you feel comfortable and where the roommate feels comfortable as well, and the terms of your agreement are clear to everyone involved. Another disadvantage is that any roommate changes can disrupt your lifestyle and your living arrangements. So you'll want to be aware of how long the person renting to you plans to be doing so. Looking into evaluating a roommate so that you have as much chance of success as possible. Be honest with yourself in terms of what you're looking for in a roommate. Smoking or non-smoking, what's your preference on that? And what lifestyle in terms of that do you yourself live? Thinking about accessibility, thinking about guests. Are you going to be having guests? Are they going to be having guests? And what are the guidelines for guests? Sound. Are you going to be being loud at certain hours? Are they going to be being loud at certain hours? Can you come to a consensus about when is appropriate for all of that? Pets, that's a very interesting one. So you'll need to evaluate if you're comfortable with pets, so that if in case the roommate has a pet, you want to be aware of your comfort level. If you have a service animal, or an emotional support animal. Those animals are allowed in affordable apartment complexes. Sometimes they request that you fill out a form to get it as a reasonable accommodation, but once that's done, you're set, no questions asked. But the problem is that if you are home sharing, you are renting from someone's private home. And so the laws that protect emotional support animals and service animals do not apply because it is private. It is not a place of public accommodation. So I will be honest and say that it is more challenging if you have a service animal or an emotional support animal to find a homeowner who is willing to rent you a room, because they need to be okay with the presence of the animal. It is not impossible. I have definitely met people who do it and have done it successfully, but that is definitely something worth noting so that you are aware that if that is your situation, you might need to broaden your search a little more than other folks, and it may take you a little longer to find somewhere to go. All right, so that's kind of a little bit of an overview about home sharing. Moving on to homeownership. So that basically just means owning your own home. There is a really wonderful organization called Homeability that can assist individuals with disabilities in purchasing a home. You are responsible for a number of the costs, but a lot of times closing costs are cheaper, and mortgage costs as well can be cheaper depending on where you want to live and what your agreement is. So it's a really wonderful program. It's basically, it involves, instead of financing the home through a bank, it finances the home through the state of Maryland. So there are a couple of different things about it. It's not completely like the general home buying process. There are a couple different things that you have to do in going through the program, but it's a really wonderful program and can help people with disabilities get connected to home buying options. There's a website there as well if you want to check that out. And if you have questions as well, we can direct you to where you need to go. As with anything, there are pros and cons with home sharing. Advantages: owning your own home. You can modify it the way you want. You don't have to ask anybody for permission. You just have to hire people for what you want to do and get it done. Disadvantages: long mortgage term equals a long commitment. You are responsible for maintaining the home. So those free fixes that we were discussing during the rent portion of the presentation, those don't apply. You would have to pay out of pocket for anything that breaks or anything that goes wrong in the home. Maintenance is your responsibility. Taxes, homeowners associations, fees, all those are involved. So when you're thinking about owning a home, be aware that it's not just the monthly mortgage payment. Other payments are involved on a monthly basis as well. So that's worth being aware of. We're going to talk about preserving your current living situation. As I said earlier, sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. We like to bring it up because since there is such a housing crisis going on in terms of people not having places to go readily that are affordable, there is value in determining if you can stay where you are to help ease the burden of trying to navigate this affordable housing system. So thinking about preserving one's living situation, one needs to think about things like eviction prevention, and that can be done through houses of worship. There are many churches in the area that can provide some eviction prevention services. Food pantries can provide some of this. Now, the churches and the food pantries, that's on a fluctuating basis because sometimes they have money, sometimes they've just run out of money. It just depends. So making those calls and trying to figure out who has what, who has funding, and who can help, that's definitely going to be really important. Community assistance agencies, same thing, that can fluctuate depending on whether or not they have funding. In addition, if you are in a situation where eviction is the current issue, you can think about seeking legal advice. Here at our center, we are not a legal organization and we do not provide legal advice of any kind. So you can reach out to your county legal aid or to Disability Rights Maryland. So we can put you in the right direction if you need contact information for any of that. Weinberg in Section 811 is what we're now going to be covering. On this slide, there's a picture of a townhouse, and we're going to be discussing Weinberg in Section 811 because this is the only direct service that we provide. Everything else, we can give folks research materials, we can give them some guidance, but Weinberg and Section 811 are the only situation where I can give someone direct application assistance and can directly monitor their application. So we put a lot of emphasis on this part of the presentation, and I'm going to take you through it step by step. The first thing that I will say is that when we think about Weinberg in Section 811, even if you get on both of the lists with us, I still highly recommend that you get on as many additional wait lists as possible. This is just 2 programs in many, and these waiting lists are very slow moving, they are very long, and they are definitely even more slow moving since the post-pandemic time. So I just want to make everybody aware of that. That said, if you qualify and you want to get on the list, we definitely want to make sure that we can help you with that. So what are the Weinberg and Section 811 waiting lists? They are managed by the Maryland Department of Disabilities. They are housing waiting lists for people with disabilities, and they require that an individual have a disability and be receiving benefits of some kind. Here at the Image Center, we do not manage this waiting list, but we can do case management for people living in the Baltimore County, Baltimore City, or Harford County areas. This is for affordable housing, and depending on the property, it can also be wheelchair accessible housing. So that just depends on the property, because there are a wide variety of properties. These are project-based voucher units. So earlier, let's recall our rental vocabulary. Project-based voucher, that means that it's attached to the unit. That means that the property made an agreement that this unit is going to be reserved for whoever applies and gets it. So if you move into one of these units and you want to move, that's going to be very difficult to do because the voucher is attached to a specific unit that was agreed upon between the property and the state of Maryland. So these units are scattered throughout Maryland. These are relatively new programs. They're only about 8 to 10 years old at the time of the recording of this presentation, which is in 2022. So they are relatively new in terms of the grand scheme of affordable housing programs. They're independent living units, so it basically would mean that you would have your own apartment, or whoever was coming with you, you'd have your own apartment unit. And they are income-based. So that's another one of our rental vocabulary terms. That means that it's going to be charging you roughly 1/3 of your monthly income for your living expenses. A lot of people like to ask me, where are the units now? Now, the first thing I will say is that there are no available units. Everything right now is leased up, but I can give you an overview of where they actually are. So for the Weinberg program, we've got units in Montgomery County, Prince George's, Dorchester, Wacomico, Somerset, Anne Arundel, Harford, Baltimore, Baltimore City, Howard. So those are the places where the Weinberg program has units currently. For the Section 811 program, we've got units in Harford County, Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Frederick, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Wacomico, Howard County, and that's all we have so far. The Section 811 program is looking to expand. Both programs are actually looking to expand. And as I mentioned previously, our center is advocating for affordable housing in a number of different areas. This is one key area where we're advocating for more money so that they can make more units available for this program. Talking about how do you know if you qualify for the Weinberg list? There are a number of qualifications that an individual must meet. They must be between ages 18 and 62. So in other words, this is a non-elderly disabled housing waiting list. If a person is 62 or older, they will be eligible for senior housing. The individual must be receiving SSI or SSDI. They must be a person with a disability. They must be able to meet certain income requirements. Those income requirements are different from county to county, and they also change every year. So we have not provided them here in the effort of avoiding confusion, depending on what you're interested in. But you can certainly reach out to us and let us know what counties you're interested in, and we can have a conversation with you to see if you might be a good candidate for the Weinberg list. The income information also varies depending on your household size. So a household of 1 is going to have lower income requirements than a household of 2 or 3. There's a little bit more required for Section 811, but we'll start with the basics. This is the same. You must be between ages 18 and 62, so that's the same for Weinberg. You must be receiving or applying for SSI or SSDI. So for Section 811, you don't have to be receiving SSI or SSDI yet. As long as you're in the application process, you very well may be eligible. You must be a person with a disability, so that's the same as Weinberg. Now, a requirement that's different from Weinberg is that you must be receiving Medicaid, or also called medical assistance. You can have Medicare and Medicaid at the same time to qualify for 811. A lot of people get confused by that, but you can have them at the same time. If you only have Medicare, then you do not qualify for this list. You must have Maryland medical assistance, also called Medicaid. We have a picture of the old Medicare card displayed on this slide. It's a red, white, and blue card. It's predominantly white, and it has a red, white, and blue banner on it. So if you have this old card, that alone does not qualify you for Section 811. So if you have this card, that is not the program that we're referring to. That will not qualify you for Section 811. This is a picture of the new Medicare card. If you have this card, this will also not qualify you for the Section 811 waiting list. This card has a picture of an eagle on it, and it will also not qualify you. Now, this next slide is the current Maryland Medicaid card. It's a red and white card, and it says Maryland Medical Assistance across the top, and that is the card that will qualify you for the Section 811 program. When you apply with me, you will need to provide me with your 11-digit Medicaid number. If I don't have that number, the system won't let me put you on the list. So if you have this card and you've got that number and you meet all the other application requirements, then you're in. There are some Section 811 living situation requirements. So Weinberg, that does not have a living situation requirement. Section 811 does have a living situation requirement. And so you need to be living in one of the following settings at the time of application: living in a nursing facility, living in a group home, homeless, which includes staying in a shelter, living on the streets, living in your car, homeless with children or youth, or fleeing domestic violence, or having an eviction notice. So those living situations are required in order to be on the Section 811 housing wait lists. What is the role of the case manager? Why does this application require case management? So the only people who have access to the application are the case managers. So in order to even get on the list, you need to be working with a case manager. So centers for independent living, like the Image Center, can assist people in being placed on these wait lists. You must not already have a case manager. So if you have a case manager for something else, they will be able to place you on the list. If they're unaware of how to do so, I speak with case managers all the time about how they can get set up with placing people on these lists. So they can feel free to contact me or anybody here at our office, and we can steer you in the right direction. But I can act as your case manager if you do not already have one, and if you are living within our Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Harford County service area. I want to close with a couple of notes about the Weinberg and Section 811 program, more or less some frequently asked questions. These lists do not guarantee housing. They're very, very long. They don't guarantee housing. They don't pass out numbers for where you are on the waiting list, because that's always changing. Waiting time varies, and we are not able to predict waiting time. All properties right now are currently leased up. There's nothing available. We can give you a summary of where the units are, but none of them are available for lease up at this time. There is a priority tier system, which means that people in institutions such as nursing facilities, they're first priority for the state. So that is a policy that the state of Maryland has set up. So that is state policy, that these lists must take people who are in nursing facilities before accepting other folks who might be lower down on the priority tier system. Another question we get asked a lot about these waiting lists is the bedroom amount. So the Weinberg program usually has anywhere from 1 to 3 bedroom units. I've never seen a studio, and I've never seen greater than 3 bedrooms. So the max is 3, minimum is 1. The Section 811 program, I've seen them have 1-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units. but I have not seen them have any other units. But if you don't have one, you can contact the Image Center to obtain an intake form. This intake form is not an application. It is just an intake form stating that you want to be a client and receive our services. You've got to complete that intake form, and then once you've completed it, you can return it to us. We will provide you with instructions on how to do that once you get the form from us. You can either fax it to us at 443-470-8593. You can mail it to us at the Image Center, 300 East Joppa Road, Suite 312, Towson, Maryland, 21286. Or you can email it to housing@imagemd.org. But again, we will be including those instructions when you get your intake form, so you'll have that all written down for a quick reference. What happens next? Once you turn in your form, someone from the Image Center, either myself or another staff member, will contact you to process your application. Again, your intake form is not an application. That just says you want to be a client with us. The actual application part comes when we call you back after receiving the intake form. Make sure your phone number is current, otherwise we're not going to be able to give you a call. Unfortunately, that has happened before, so we like to make sure that we can reach folks. We cannot place you on the list without this next contact, so it is very important that we get in contact with you in some way so that we can set up the application interview process. We're going to talk about searching for housing and what that can be like. So we really encourage folks, as I was sort of saying earlier, scouting out your desired neighborhood is really important. Doing some research is important, going online, consulting newspapers, looking on social media. Sometimes on, something like Facebook, different communities will have a Facebook page specifically for their community. So you might find that helpful so that you can get a sense of what it's like to live there. They also might post opportunities in there as well. You can check out different grocery stores in the neighborhood, recreation centers, different things like that to see if it's a good neighborhood for you. So looking for home sharing opportunities, there's a variety of different ways to do this. So there's a really wonderful organization called St. Ambrose Homeshare, and they pair individuals who have rooms to rent with individuals who are looking for rooms to rent. And they do that pairing based on an interview and a background check process. So if you want a third party to be involved with helping you finding a room to rent, you can definitely work with St. Ambrose Homeshare. They're a great organization that we refer folks to very often. You can also use different websites like Craigslist and others. Of course, we encourage you to exercise caution in these cases. Social media, word of mouth, anybody that you might know who might have any affordable housing options, any room renting places, things like that. Churches, grocery store bulletins, newspaper ads, all kinds of things like that can really help you do research on individuals who may have rooms to rent. So in terms of looking for affordable housing and rental units specifically, again, we talked about Weinberg in 811. We talked about Housing Choice Voucher in Section 8. Those are all really great things to look into. But ultimately, because those wait lists are so long, they are not enough. And so we really recommend that these 3 websites that we have listed on this page here, you go to those, you tour around those, see what properties you like, what you don't like, and you try to figure out which ones you like, give them a call, and you try to get set up on their waiting list as well. So this would be, instead of like a big program, this would be applying to individual property waiting lists. So I encourage you to look into those. I'll say them out loud. The first one is mdhousingsearch.org. The second one is resources.hud.gov. And the third one is really good for helping to find Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher properties. It's less useful for general research, but that one is gosection8.com. And that's 8, the number 8, gosection8.com. Public housing authorities. Every county has a public housing authority, as we were discussing earlier. They have housing choice voucher services, but they sometimes have other waiting lists, like how we were discussing how Baltimore County has some additional project-based housing. So it just depends on the county and what they're doing with their housing. You can find the housing authorities by Googling the county name and then writing the words housing authority. So I could type in Baltimore County Housing Authority or Montgomery County Housing Authority, and it'll come right up. And then you're able to explore services on there and get signed up for anything that you're interested in. Waiting list must be applied to individually for each county. So unfortunately, you have to go through county by county and apply to each one because they all have their own separate. All right, I want to share a couple tips about calling a property manager's office. So when you speak with a property manager for the first time, they get so many calls every day. And so your words and tone are important. You want to make sure that you're polite. You want to make sure that you're brief. Do not give too much information about yourself. That's definitely really important about disability and public and any sort of health information that you want to keep private. And we've provided a sample script here for you, saying something along the lines of, hello, my name is, insert your name. So hello, my name is such and such. I saw a listing for your property on this website, and I was wondering if you could tell me more about your application opportunities or something to that effect. And so just keeping it brief, making it clear what your ask is, those are the things we recommend. I have similar advice for calling a prospective roommate. So if you see someone who has a room for rent in their home, you'll want to do the same thing. First impressions are important, being polite and being brief. It's important, again, to not give too much information about yourself, including about your disability. If you want to speak about your accommodations, that's fine, but avoid giving too much personal health information. And then a similar script. Hello, my name is such and such. I noticed your advertisement for a roommate, and I was wondering if I could speak with you about it. So that's kind of a suggested script we have, getting right to the point about why you're calling and who you are. This is one of my biggest pieces of advice because I've seen so many people go through the affordable housing application process. Keeping a log of what you've applied to, who you've spoken with, who you followed up with is so important. Document all your follow-up calls, keep receipts of all submitted applications, whether you're doing this hard copy or you have an email folder in your email account where you keep all your housing stuff. We really, really recommend doing that. I talk to so many people who tell me that they're on wait lists, but they don't know which waiting list they're on. And that can pose a problem if they get a new phone number or a new address, and then they don't know who to contact to say, hey, I'm on your waiting list and I want to let you know that I have changed my address or I have changed my phone number. And that's so important because if they don't have your updated contact info, then you will miss out on opportunities because they don't know how to contact you. So we really think that a housing unit inspection is so important. Visit the property before you sign anything. You don't want to get blamed for any damage, and you want to make sure that the apartment is the way you want it to look so that you're not signing up for something that you are ultimately not going to like. So you'll want to think about when you're doing this pre-lease sign check, you're going to want to think about accessibility, conditions of floors, walls, and appliances, access to public transportation, and other things like that to make sure that the apartment is in good condition when it is being put under your name as a rental property. This is a really important one. So having your vital documents ready is really important. Almost every property application is going to ask for things such as your birth certificate, your photo ID card, social security card, social security award letter if you are receiving benefits, or any sort of proof of income, like a pay stub. Also thinking about bank account statements as well. Do you know how to get your bank account statements so that when the property asks for them, you're able to provide them with, the 6 months most recent or whatever they may be requesting. If you use a direct express card, if you don't have a bank account and use a card instead, you can get an ATM balance receipt, and that will give information about recent transactions as well as the current balance. So having all these vital documents, I've seen people miss out on housing opportunities because they did not have, let's say, their social security card or their photo ID. And so they had to go through MVA or through Social Security Administration to get a new one. And by the time it took weeks and weeks and all the processing took place, the housing opportunity ended up being given to someone else. So you want to make sure that you have copies of these documents and that you will be ready to either scan them in or present them as appropriate. If you don't know how to get any of these documents, you can feel free to contact us and we can get you started. Another thing that you can expect during the application process is background checks. There are 3 background checks that are usually performed: housing history check, a credit background check, and a criminal background check. These are not always performed. Some places don't do any of them. Some places do all 3. Some places do 1 or 2. So it just depends on where you are, but just being, or where you're applying, but just being aware of those possibilities. So for the housing history check, they're going to be looking at things like past evictions, issues with landlords or neighbors, poor housekeeping in the past, different things like that. So if you are being asked to provide your previous landlord's information, it's probably because they're going to be running a housing check. They'll also be asking about fraud, inability to pay rent, different things like that. If you have any questions about that, you can let us know. There are often times folks who have questions about previous eviction situations or things like that that they want to try to understand. So we can help you navigate that. You can do your own credit check. There's a link provided here. If your credit is not where you want it to be, we recommend starting to make payments, even if they are small. And of course, getting credit counseling if needed. A lot of times for properties, they can make medical debt reasonable accommodations. So if you have a lot of medical debt and it's messing up your credit, sometimes they can make a reasonable accommodation for that. So that just depends on the property. And if that is your situation, you can feel free to contact us and we can talk more about that. Looking at criminal background checks. There is also a link provided here where you can do your own criminal background check, see how you show up in the system. If you do have any charges on your account, you can get legal assistance. Legal aid can be of assistance, homeless persons representation project, and different things like that. Now, homeless persons representation project can even help folks with getting charges expunged. So that may be something you may want to look into so that you can clear the background checks. Criminal background restrictions are going to vary from property to property. So if you pass one property check, you might not pass a different one. It just depends on what check they're using. And what is in the past on a person's particular record. For the Weinberg and 811 program, just as a quick note about that, we are unable to put anybody on that list who is a lifetime registered sex offender or who has produced methamphetamines on federally assisted property. So that's just one note about that. Properties also do have additional background checks for criminal background checks. So, but again, I've seen folks not pass at some properties, but pass at other properties. So it just depends on what criminal background check is being used. Another thing I want to note is that there are sometimes opportunities for reasonable accommodations if the criminal activity was related to a mental health disability. So for example, if a person ran out of medication and committed a crime and then was able to get back on their medication, but the charge is still on their record, it's possible that we can get a reasonable accommodation arranged so that that does not count against them. All right, so moving on to a couple of closing notes. We're on the home stretch here. So ask for help if you need it. You can ask a friend, a family member. Centers for Independent Living, that's us. We're always here to help and clarify things. Case manager, again, that's either us or whoever you have as your caseworker or a social worker. So conclusion, you want to be realistic when you're searching for housing. You're also really going to want to be patient because it's going to take some time. And if you are in an immediate housing situation, there are some things that can be done temporarily to assist. But in terms of actually getting that apartment, that's going to take some time. Also, being proactive, that might be the biggest piece of advice that I can give with this presentation. Because being proactive, getting on as many wait lists as you can, those are the people who get affordable housing. It might take some time. And yes, applying for lots of housing waiting lists is very time consuming. But that is the best advice I can give. Being proactive, being engaged in that research, getting on as many as you can. Apply to as many wait lists as you can. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation. If you are interested or able to donate to our center, we are definitely happy to receive donations. They help us put on presentations like this and serve people across the Baltimore area. So we thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to us at the contact information we have listed if you have further questions about this presentation or if you are ready to get set up with our housing navigation services. We thank you and we look forward to assisting you.